The boy was burning up in his arms, skin slick with fever sweat, breath thin as paper. He didn't stir when the horses rode up, 8 of them, maybe 9, shadowed silhouettes cresting the ridge just as the moon cracked through the clouds like a silver blade. Every rider carried a rifle, all pointed straight at the front porch of a ranch that hadn't seen visitors in weeks. The lead horse stepped forward and stopped at the fence line, its rider sitting tall in the saddle, face lost in shadow under the brim of a broad hat. "Step away from the boy, rancher." The voice was calm, level, but too calm, like water right before it boils. Behind it, saddle leather creaked, metal clicked, the kind of orchestra that meant every man out there had made peace with pulling a trigger tonight. The rancher didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood at the top of the steps with the boy cradled in his arms, the child's shallow breaths puffing faint clouds in the cold air. The wood beneath his boots was wet with blood and vomit, some of it fresh, most of it the boy's. He didn't ask who they were. He didn't have to. He already knew. "You rode hard," he said quietly, "harder than a man does for justice." The lead rider shifted in his saddle. "We rode for blood. There's a difference. So before we ride straight into the fire, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, if Frontier Stories speak to your soul." The rancher looked down at the boy. Couldn't have been older than 10. Fever had stolen his name sometime during the night, but he still clutched the edge of the rancher's coat with white-knuckled fingers, as if he knew death was waiting at the edge of the pasture, and this stranger was the last thing standing between him and it. "What did he do?" the rancher asked. The answer came not from the leader, but from the second man to his right, younger, angrier, barely holding his horse. "He stole from us. He ran. That ain't an answer. He's a killer's son," another spat, "and that makes him no better than the bastard who birthed him." That was the truth of it then. The boy twitched in his arms, muttering something too slurred to catch. The rancher shifted his weight and stepped down one stair, slow and deliberate. Every rifle in the darkness tensed as if tethered to the motion. His voice cut through the frost like a whetstone. "You think a child earns the sins of his father?" A pause. Then the lead man's voice again, low, sure, and dangerous. "Sometimes blood don't just run. It stains. That boy's daddy killed my brother in front of his wife and kids, then took off into the desert like a coyote. Now his pup shows up on your porch half dead, dragging a fever and God knows what else, and you think you're doing the Lord's work by nursing him." "I didn't think," the rancher said. "He collapsed in my yard. I acted." "You acted wrong." "No," the rancher said softly. "I acted human." He felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air. One of the horses stepped sideways. A click echoed off the rocks. Somebody was getting itchy. "Listen to me, all of you," the rancher called out. "I don't know who his father is. Don't care. I found a dying boy on my land. What I care about is whether he lives through the night. So unless one of you's got medicine, or better hands than mine, lower your rifles and ride out." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then came a sound that made his heart stutter, the hammer of a rifle being cocked. "You've got 5 seconds to put him down," the lead rider said, voice devoid of heat now. "Then walk away. You won't be followed." The rancher's arms tightened around the boy. He turned slowly, took one step back, up onto the porch. "I ain't putting him down." The boy stirred again, his cracked lips forming a whisper. "Mama." The rancher looked toward the sound, but the boy's eyes didn't open. He was burning up from the inside. maybe hours from death, maybe minutes, and still those rifles didn't waver. "I'll count," the leader said, louder now. "1." Behind the house, the wind picked up, moaning through the dry trees. Somewhere, a horse whinnied in the dark. The rancher set the boy gently down on the porch, wrapping him in a wool blanket, pulled from the doorway behind. 2. He stood, slowly, moved one hand toward the rifle leaning against the post, slowly, deliberately, letting them see every motion. 3. He didn't pick up the rifle, just stood beside it, hand resting on the butt. His face was calm, still, eyes locked on the leader's shadowed face. 4. "You fire on me," the rancher said evenly. "You better pray I fall on the first shot, because if I get up again, there won't be a man left standing between me and that moon." The wind howled. A beat passed, then another. The 5th count never came. Instead, one of the riders dismounted. "Eli," the leader snapped, warning clear. But Eli kept walking, rifle still slung but hand near it. As he stepped closer, the moonlight finally hit his face. Young, maybe mid-20s, scar across the chin, eyes full of fire. "That boy's name is Jonah," he said. "He's my nephew." The rancher didn't move. "He was born wrong," Eli went on. "Too soft, too kind. His daddy raised him with fists, said love was something earned. When the boy ran, I figured he'd be dead before he saw 20. The wind kicked up again, cold and sharp. "But then he ends up here," Eli said. "And you sit with him through the fever. You gave him a blanket. I gave him a chance," the rancher said. Behind them, the men on horseback fidgeted. Angry murmurs passed like rattlesnake tails in tall grass. "His mother was my sister," Eli said, eyes hardening, "and she died, begging that boy be spared from what raised him." He looked back at the others. "I'm taking him home." The leader spat into the dirt. "Over my dead." "I'll ride through you if I have to, Clay," Eli snapped. "But you'll have to look your wife in the eyes and explain why you killed a fevered child." Clay stared at him, the kind of stare that held old grudges and buried brothers and too many nights haunted by blood. But something in it cracked. Clay turned his horse without a word. One by one, the others followed, until only Eli remained at the bottom of the steps. "You did right by him," he said quietly. "I didn't do it for thanks." Eli nodded. "Still, you bought him time." The boys stirred again, whispering a name that sounded like a prayer. "Mama." Eli stepped forward and reached for the boy. The rancher stepped between them. "Not yet," he said. "He ain't strong enough to ride." Eli hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll come back tomorrow, alone." And with that he turned, mounted, and rode off into the night. The rancher stood alone again, the fevered boy moaning behind him, rifles retreating into shadow, but the tension still thick in the air like gunpowder. He didn't move for a long time, until a voice from the dark said softly, "You might have made things worse." The rancher turned. A silhouette stepped from the barn. A woman. Her name was Mercy, and she wasn't wrong. But she hadn't seen what he'd seen in that boy's eyes. He looked back at the porch, at the barely breathing child wrapped in wool and trembling, and then he said, "Maybe, but worse or not, it was the right thing." The stars above seemed colder than before, but something inside the rancher burned a little warmer. It started just after sundown. Wind out of the north, dry and sharp as a rusted blade, dusting the horizon with a copper haze. The kind of night that made coyotes yip louder and the horses twitch in their stalls. The rancher was stacking wood behind the house when he saw movement near the fence line, slow, staggering. At first, he thought it was a drunk rider come too far off the trail, but then the figure collapsed like a scarecrow come undone, face first, into the dirt, one arm outstretched toward the house. He didn't move at first, just stood there, axe in one hand, staring across the field. When a man lives alone for too many years, he learns to wait, to listen. Sometimes folks fake injury to get close. Other times they're not faking, but they're carrying a different kind of trouble that comes riding in behind them. Still, that figure hadn't moved. The rancher finally stepped forward, slow and steady, eyes scanning the tree line, the rocks, the tall grass. If this was a trap, it wasn't a clever one. The figure on the ground was a boy. 10, maybe 11, ragged shirt, bare feet, and bruises up both arms that looked older than the trail dust. His skin was damp with sweat, but cold to the touch, and his breathing came shallow and fast. Lips cracked, cheeks red with heat, eyes fluttering like he was caught in a dream he couldn't wake from. "Hey," the rancher said, kneeling beside him. "You hear me, boy?" The boy tried to speak but failed. His throat clicked dryly. The only word that passed his lips sounded like "Ma." Just that. Then nothing. The rancher slipped an arm under the boy's back, lifting him with surprising gentleness. The child's head lolled against his shoulder, and for a moment he felt how light he was, all bones and fever. Whatever had brought him here had taken nearly everything else. As he crossed the porch, the boy stirred and whispered again, "Don't let him find me." Then he passed out. Inside the cabin, the air was cooler. The fire in the hearth was low, just embers now, but the rancher stoked it quickly, building up the flame with practiced hands. He laid the boy on the cot, fetched water from the pump, and began wiping him down with a rag that hadn't seen use in years. He moved with the precision of someone who had done this before, long ago, before the silence, before the years stretched empty. The fever was bad, worse than anything he'd seen since the pox tore through cattle country. The boy twisted and muttered in his sleep, names, cries, broken words that came too soft to follow. But one thing was clear. Someone had beat him, bad, and whoever that someone was, the boy had run far to get away. By midnight, the boy was shivering hard, despite the fire and the blankets. The rancher sat beside him, holding a tin cup of water, and whispering things he didn't even know he remembered. "You stay with me, son. You're safe here. You rest." The boy didn't open his eyes, but he calmed, and for the first time in many, many years, the rancher prayed, not with words, just with presence, with stillness, with the decision to stay by that boy's side until whatever had hold of him let go, or finished the job. He'd seen sickness take grown men in hours, and this boy, he wasn't fighting well. The wind outside grew harsher, whipping against the walls like ghosts trying to claw their way in. Coyotes howled from the ridge. The horses in the stable kicked at their stalls. And the rancher sat through it all, eyes never leaving the child. Sometime around 3 in the morning he heard it. Hooves. Far off. Just one rider, moving slow. The kind of slow that meant they were searching. The rancher moved to the window and peered out. Nothing in sight. Just open field, pine shadow, and moonlight sharp on the rocks. But the sound kept on. Closer. Then stopped. He waited. Breath held. The fire crackled behind him. The boy stirred again, moaning softly, and then a knock. 3 slow raps on the door, not hard, not demanding, but not uncertain either. The rancher crossed the room, rifle in hand, and stood just behind the door. "Who is it?" he asked. Silence. Then a woman's voice, steady and quiet. "My name's Mercy Delane. I live 2 ridges over. You don't know me, but I know you." That gave him pause. The name stirred something. He'd seen her once at the general store in town. A widow, folks had said. Smart. Carried herself like she knew more than most men did. He cracked the door, just enough to see her face in the moonlight. She sat astride a pale horse, hat in hand, eyes focused sharp as cut glass. She wasn't armed, but there was weight in her presence that said she didn't need to be. "You have a boy," she said. The rancher didn't answer. I followed his tracks from the creek bed. He came off the Johnson trail, bleeding and half mad with heat. "You found him?" Again, silence. "I ain't here to hurt him," she said. "I'm here to warn you." He opened the door fully. "Talk." She nodded toward the house. "May I?" He stepped aside. Inside, she didn't waste time. Her eyes went straight to the cot, to the boy curled up like a wounded fox. "How bad?" "Fever. Broken ribs, maybe. Old bruises. He's fighting, but it's not even." She exhaled slowly, the air trembling in her chest. "I saw his kin," she said. "They're riding. 3 of them now, maybe more by morning. Mean, hard men. I've seen what they do when they think they've been wronged." "What did the boy do?" She looked at the rancher, and in her eyes he saw something like guilt. He was born into the wrong bloodline. That's enough for them. The boy stirred again. This time, when he moaned, she knelt beside him, brushing sweat-matted hair from his forehead. "He's Jonah Gray," she said quietly. "Youngest of the Gray clan. His father killed a man in Abilene. His uncle shot a preacher near Wichita. And his brothers. I don't care about them," the rancher said. She looked up, met his eyes. "Then you're already in danger." He turned toward the fire, where a kettle whistled softly. The smell of pine smoke and illness filled the room. He poured another cup of water and brought it to her. She took it with shaking hands. "Why warn me?" "Because I had a son once," she whispered, "and because someone should have warned him." The boy let out a sharp cry in his sleep. They both turned toward the cot at once. And outside, far in the hills, a wolf howled, followed by the echo of galloping hooves. "Dawn's coming," she said grimly, "and so are they." The rancher stepped to the window. "I'll be ready." But in his gut, he knew there was no such thing as ready for the kind of men who killed their own. The sun cracked the horizon like an eye slowly opening, casting long shadows across the frost-covered fields. The boy stirred again, his fever breaking just enough for a flicker of consciousness to return. He didn't speak right away, just groaned, then turned his face into the blanket like a wounded animal. The rancher sat nearby, boots on the floor, coffee in hand, eyes hollow from a night without sleep. Beside him, Mercy stood at the window, watching the tree line beyond the pasture. Her voice came low. "They'll come fast, and they won't ask questions." He didn't look up. "Let 'em come." A dry wind slipped through the cracks of the cabin walls, stirring the ashes in the fireplace. Outside, a hawk circled overhead, slow and steady, like it was waiting for something to die. The boy coughed, not hard. just enough to bring him back to the edge of waking. Then with a rasp that seemed to scrape out of his chest, he whispered, "Mama." Mercy moved first. She knelt beside the cot, touched his arm gently. "You're safe, Jonah. It's all right." His eyes fluttered open, glassy, unfocused. They flicked to her face, then to the rancher, who stood now, cup set aside. "Thirsty?" the boy croaked. Mercy fetched the tin cup, held it steady as he drank. When he coughed again, she laid a hand on his chest. "Easy now." The rancher watched, silent. He was good at silence. But this time, he broke it. "You remember how you got here?" The boy's gaze wandered the room, blinking slowly. "Ran." "From what?" There was a long pause. Then the boy's eyes darkened, not with fear, but something older. Hurt. He turned his face away. They said, "I was a curse." Mercy's jaw clenched. The rancher took a slow breath. "Who said that?" The boy didn't answer, just muttered something under his breath. It sounded like a name. Then another, then a third. He was naming them, brothers, uncles, one. His father. Mercy sat back, expression unreadable. The boy's breathing grew ragged. "I didn't do nothing," he whispered. "I saw what they did to him. I told 'em it was wrong. They said that made me worse." The rancher crouched beside him now, voice steady as a fence post. "What did you see?" Jonah blinked slowly. Sweat glistened on his brow. "They beat a man. Said he owed them for cattle. But he didn't. He said he'd already paid. My father shot him in the gut, laughed while he bled." His hands gripped the blanket, small knuckles bone white. "And you ran," Mercy said softly. The boy nodded. "I tried to stop it. They said I was shaming the family, that I'd turn lawman if I lived long enough." The rancher stood up. "That's what this is, then," he muttered. "They're riding not just to kill him. They're riding to erase a witness." Mercy nodded slowly. "And they'll call it justice." Outside, the wind rose again. Horses snorted nervously in the barn. The rancher moved to the table, opened a drawer, and pulled out an oilskin bundle. Inside, a revolver, bullets, and a folded paper he hadn't touched in years. He unwrapped it, ran a thumb along the weapon's barrel. "You ever fired that since?" Mercy asked. "No." "You planning to?" "If they cross that fence with murder in their eyes," he said, "they'll meet God on the porch." Mercy crossed her arms. "And if they wear badges?" The question hung in the air like a loaded chamber, because in this part of the territory, justice and corruption often shared the same saddle. The rancher looked at her. "I don't care what colors they wear. They raise a rifle toward this house, they drop." There was a long silence between them. Mercy broke it. "You don't owe him anything." The rancher shook his head. "I owe someone, maybe not him. Maybe not you, maybe not myself even, but I've seen too many graves filled because good folks decided to look the other way." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I'll help you watch the North Ridge," she said. "They'll come from there." Mid-morning brought a stillness that didn't sit right. The boy had fallen into a lighter sleep, muttering now and then but breathing stronger. Color had returned to his lips, and he no longer burned like kindling. Mercy brought in water from the pump, pausing at every footstep, scanning the tree line as if shadows might start shooting. "They're close," she said. "How many?" "Don't know, but the birds are gone, even the hawk." The rancher cleaned the revolver, laid it beside the rifle by the door, and slipped a smaller derringer into the drawer of the end table. There wasn't much to barricade with, but he stacked what he could against the windows. As he moved a chair in front of the boy's cot, Jonah stirred again. "Don't let them take me," he rasped. "You've got my word," the rancher said. The boy looked at him then, really looked, eyes clearer, brighter. "Why?" The rancher paused, considered the question, then, "Because once I didn't save someone, and I buried them with my silence." Jonah swallowed, eyes flickering. "Was it your son?" "No," the rancher said, "but it should have been." Outside, hooves, not fast, not charging, but deliberate, measured. A dozen, maybe more. Mercy moved to the window, jaw tight. "They're spread wide," she murmured, trying to circle the place. The rancher stepped to the porch, rifle in hand. The riders emerged one by one over the ridge, like shadows leaking from the earth. One man rode ahead, broad-shouldered, black hat, red scarf, thick beard, cold eyes. He pulled his horse up just beyond the outer gate. "You've got something of ours," he called. The rancher didn't move. "What exactly do you think I've got?" "My brother's boy," the man said. "We're here to take him home." "Boy's sick. We'll see to him." "Like you saw to that rancher near Abilene?" The man's smile turned cold. "You don't want to stand in this, stranger. Blood calls to blood." The rancher rested the rifle against the porch beam. "I ain't his blood," he said, "but I'm the one standing between you and him." The man turned his head slightly, and behind him, others spread out, rifles in hand, faces unreadable. Then the man called, "Last chance, rancher." Mercy stepped through the doorway, shotgun slung across her arm. "You don't speak for justice," she said. "You speak for silence, and that boy's silence died when he ran." The man's face darkened. He raised his hand, and just as it fell, a voice rang out from inside the house. "I'll speak." They turned. The boy stood in the doorway, pale, shaking, but upright. He gripped the frame like it was the only thing holding him up. "You killed that man in Abilene," he said. "I saw it. You beat him and laughed, and I ain't staying quiet." The silence that followed was deadly. The leader's face turned from fury to something else. Fear. "You don't want to do this, Jonah," he said. But Jonah stood his ground. "I ain't your blood," he said. "Not anymore." The rancher stepped beside him. Mercy raised her shotgun, and from behind the barn came the sharp clack of another rifle. Someone else was watching, and now the men at the gate realized it. They weren't hunting. They were cornered. The standoff cracked open like ice under pressure. The Gray Clan shifted in their saddles, each man realizing at once this wasn't the ambush they'd expected. It was something else entirely. From behind the barn, the click of a second rifle came again, then a third. From the hayloft, from the trees near the creek, one by one, shadows revealed themselves, and every one of them carried steel. Mercy stepped forward from the porch, the morning sun catching her pale hair like fire on dry grass. The shotgun in her hands was steady, her eyes steadier. "I told you before," she said, her voice cool but cutting. "You weren't the only ones watching." Clay Gray, the patriarch and self-appointed judge of his family's vengeance, stared hard. "Who the hell are you?" Mercy cocked her head. "The woman who buried your brother's second victim, the woman who listened when his widow finally spoke, the woman who's been waiting for someone like you to ride too far from your lies. Clay shifted in the saddle, face twitching. You think this is justice? He spat, harboring a coward who turned his back on kin. I think justice is a boy who stood up when no one else would, she snapped, even if it meant running, even if it meant living in fear of his own blood. The rancher stepped beside her, rifle cradled in his arms. You said it yourself, Clay. Blood stains. But maybe it doesn't have to spread. Clay's eyes darted to the ridgeline, where another shape emerged. Sheriff Briggs, mounted and flanked by 2 deputies. A neutral party, maybe, but one known to take bribes and look the other way when the Greys came calling. His presence here changed things, especially now. Briggs rode slow, taking in the ranch, the rifles, the tension thick as molasses in a July sun. Well, he said, dismounting with theatrical slowness, looks like a whole lot of folks about to make a whole lot of bad decisions. The rancher kept his gaze level. You gonna stop it? Briggs chuckled. Ain't my place to interfere in family matters. I'm just here to make sure no one breaks the law. Mercy scoffed. The law's already broken, Briggs, and you helped. Briggs glanced her way. That's so? It's so, she said coldly. You signed off on every cattle theft they blamed on others. You buried reports, ignored witness testimony. You gave Clay Gray the run of the valley, and now he thinks the law's just another dog on his leash. Clay's face flushed red. Careful, girl. I don't take kindly to being accused by whores and widows. Mercy stepped forward, shotgun rising slightly. I ain't either, she said, and you'll choke on that mistake before the day is through. The wind shifted. The hawk circled overhead again, its scream slicing through the air like warning. Jonah leaned against the doorframe, eyes sharper now despite the fever. They killed a man in Abilene, and they'll keep killing unless someone stops them. The sheriff looked at the boy, then at the rancher, then at the circle of guns trained on Clay's crew. This a court now, Briggs muttered. Is that what we're playing at? No, the rancher said. This is what happens when the court fails, when men like you let evil hide behind badges and bloodlines. Briggs hesitated, then spit in the dust. Fine. Y'all want a showdown? That's your right. And with that he turned and walked away, not toward the Greys, not toward the ranch, but to the tree line, where he stood with his back to it all, doing nothing, choosing not to see. Mercy lowered her shotgun slightly. He won't help. He's made that clear. I didn't expect him to, the rancher replied. Clay raised his hand again. You got one chance left. Give us the boy. Let us handle our own, or this turns into something bloody. The rancher didn't blink. You already made it bloody, Clay. You just didn't expect anyone to clean it up. Then the voice came again. Jonah's. Stronger this time. Clearer. You said you'd make me watch. That I'd learn something. Clay's eyes snapped to him. You said weakness was worse than sin, that people like me didn't deserve a name, and you beat it into me till I bled. A murmur rippled through the Greys. One of the younger men, a cousin maybe, shifted in his saddle, suddenly uncomfortable. Jonah stepped forward, still barefoot, still shaking, but standing. You were wrong, he said. I ain't yours, and I ain't staying quiet. Clay barked a laugh, but it rang hollow. You think these strangers'll protect you? You think this ends here? The rancher's rifle rose slightly. No, it ends with the next bullet if you don't ride out. Then something happened that no one expected. One of Clay's men, an older brother or uncle, turned his horse away. Then another. Without a word, 2 men rode off the ridge, heading back toward the trail. Clay's eyes widened. "You cowards!" "They heard enough," Mercy said. "You ride down that hill, Clay," the rancher said quietly, "and you'll die before you touch my gate." Clay looked around now, eyes wild, realizing for the first time just how outnumbered he truly was. And worse, how exposed. He pulled his reins hard, spitting fury. "This ain't over," he hissed. "That boy's name is cursed, and anyone who shelters him's cursed with him." Mercy stepped off the porch, loading both barrels of her shotgun with a cold click. "Then I'll ride with the cursed," she said, "because I'd rather stand with the damned than kneel with the wicked." Clay glared at her, at Jonah, at the rancher. Then he turned his horse and rode. The wind scattered dust behind him like the end of a storm, and in his wake, silence returned, a silence filled with something heavier than fear, hope. But as the hawk circled one last time and disappeared beyond the horizon, Mercy's words echoed across the field like an omen. "You saved his life today," she said, "but they'll come back, and next time it'll be more than rifles they bring." The rancher nodded. "I know." And inside, Jonah collapsed again onto the cot, sleep taking him quick. But this time, it wasn't the sleep of fever. It was peace. Dawn came like a blade, sharp and silent. The sky over the valley turned from steel gray to bone white, shadows long and still across the frost-bitten pasture. Every tree, every fence post, every hoofprint in the frozen dirt seemed to hold its breath. Inside the ranch house, the boy stirred again, his fever broken but not gone. He turned toward the warmth of the fire, his lips moving without sound. Mercy knelt beside him, her hand on his brow, whispering words only he could hear. The rancher hadn't slept. He'd stood at the window all night, eyes locked on the tree line where Clay Gray had disappeared, watching, waiting, and just before first light, he saw it. Movement. Not fast, not loud, not bold, careful, methodical, and many. He set his coffee down and walked to the door. "Mercy," he said. She was already rising. No questions, just instinct. "They're coming?" Same as before, but more of 'em this time. She checked the shotgun, loaded shells into the worn breech with steady hands. "How many?" He didn't answer right away, just opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold bit into his face like nails, but he didn't flinch. Out in the fields, figures were emerging, 5 on horseback, 3 on foot, rifles cradled, hats low over their faces. These weren't the hot-headed cousins and wild-eyed brothers from yesterday. These were the smart ones, the careful ones. And they'd brought someone else. At the center of the group rode a man in a dark duster and a wide-brimmed hat trimmed with rawhide. He didn't speak, didn't signal, just sat his horse like a judge behind a bench. Mercy stepped beside the rancher, her breath fogged in the morning chill. "That's Elias Gray," she muttered. "Clay's older brother, the quiet one, mean as drought and twice as patient." Elias raised one hand, then called out, calm and cool, "Rancher, I'd like a word." The rancher didn't move. "You've had your words." Elias leaned forward in his saddle. "This ain't vengeance, mister. This is settlement. That boy in there, he's blood, ours, and what he's done, what he's said, what he knows. Well, that's not something we can let walk free." Mercy spat into the dust. "He's a child." Elias smiled faintly. He's a witness, and in this territory, witness and enemy are damn near the same thing. The rancher shifted his stance, not to intimidate, not to threaten, but to show the rifle in his hand was no longer resting. Elias took note. "I've got 12 men with me," he said flatly, "and I ain't here to shoot first, but I will finish it if you make me." "You've already started it," the rancher said, "when you left a boy to die in the dirt, when you beat the truth out of your own kin till he ran bleeding across half the county." Elias tilted his head. "That truth'll burn down families." Mercy stepped down off the porch, shotgun tucked under her arm like a purse. "Maybe some families need burning." The wind kicked up behind her, cold and bitter. Elias exhaled slowly. "We're offering a way out. Hand him over, quietly, no blood, no stories." The rancher didn't blink. "No." Elias's smile thinned into something brittle. "You're making this your fight?" The rancher nodded. "Already did, when I opened my door." A silence passed between them, taut as a wire stretched across the canyon. Then Elias reached into his coat. Mercy tensed. But he didn't draw steel. Instead, he pulled out a folded paper, held it up. "Then maybe you'll respect this." He tossed it into the dirt. The rancher walked down, picked it up, and unfolded it. His face didn't change. But something inside him shifted. It was a writ, signed by Territorial Judge Howard Voss. A warrant for Jonah Gray, wanted for conspiracy and incitement of vigilante violence. A lie, dressed in ink and legal flourish. Mercy stepped beside him. "Read it." Her lips parted in a silent curse. "They're weaponizing the law." Elias nodded. "No more frontier trials. No more hangings in the dark. You want justice? We brought it proper." The rancher refolded the paper and tucked it into his coat pocket. "You paid for this." Elias didn't deny it. Money talks, and gray money never shuts up. Then he said, "You got until that sun clears the ridge. Then we're coming in." The rancher nodded, then turned and walked back toward the house. He didn't speak again until the door closed behind them. Mercy watched him, saw something change in his gait, like a final switch had been thrown. "Tell me what you're thinking." He moved to the cabinet near the hearth, pulled out a small iron box. Inside, tools wrapped in linen. Mercy's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Explosives, black powder, charges I used back when I built the well." "Dynamite?" she whispered. He shook his head. "That's for cowards and martyrs. This is just enough to wake the devil." She crossed her arms. "You really planning to fight them all?" The rancher looked to the corner, where Jonah lay, half dozing, unaware of the doom outside. "I'm planning to make sure that boy sees another dawn." Mercy moved to the window, watched the shadows of the grays as they circled, slow and confident. "They won't stop, not with a warrant in hand, not when every judge and sheriff in the territories got gray money in their pocket." He nodded. "Then we don't play by their rules." "What do we play by?" The rancher turned. For the first time in hours, his voice had weight. "We play by his," he said, nodding toward Jonah. "Truth. Courage. And if we fall like folks who didn't run." She studied him a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a soft smile. It was the kind worn by soldiers before a last charge. "Then I guess we should load the back rifles." They got to work. Quiet, focused. By the time the sun touched the ridge, the ranch was ready. The barn had been rigged with traps that would make cavalry think twice. The windows were covered. Ammunition split between them, water and medicine packed for retreat. And Jonah, he was waking. He looked around, dazed. "What's happening?" he croaked. Mercy knelt beside him, smoothing his hair. "Trouble." He tried to sit up. "They found me." The rancher came over, crouched low. "They did." "I'm sorry," Jonah whispered. The rancher shook his head. "You didn't bring this, they did." Jonah's eyes filled. "They'll kill you." The rancher met his gaze. No fear there. Only clarity, not before they learn what it means to bleed for a lie. Outside, Elias raised his hand again, and the line of grays moved forward, not charging, just coming. And inside the house, 3 hearts beat like war drums. One of them barely 10 years old, but brave enough to burn down a legacy. The first shot cracked the silence just as the sun spilled fully over the ridge, washing the land in pale gold. It wasn't a warning. It was a signal. Elias Gray's men surged forward like wolves unleashed, rifles raised, boots pounding through hardpan and frost. Their shadows stretched behind them, long and sharp, like spears thrown by fate. Inside the cabin, the rancher exhaled once, then fired. The lead gray, red shirt, cocky swagger, dropped mid-stride. The round caught him in the throat, and he collapsed wordlessly into the dust. Mercy was already moving. She fired from the eastern window, her shot clipping a rider as he tried to flank. He wheeled away, screaming, blood painting the saddle. The second wave came harder, more precise. Someone among them had training. A bullet shattered a porch post. Another slammed into the cabin door, thudding into the oak just inches from Jonah's cot. "Down!" the rancher roared, diving low and dragging the boy behind the table. Jonah coughed, eyes wide, mouth open to scream, but nothing came out. Just fear and breath, and the sound of justice crashing through wood. Mercy reloaded with calm efficiency. "They're spreading. 10 o'clock, trying to push the smokehouse." "Let 'em," the rancher growled. He grabbed a torch from the hearth, one he'd wrapped with oil-soaked cloth, and hurled it out the side window toward the stack of kindling he'd built around the old smokehouse wall. It caught instantly. Flames leapt high, dancing up into the air with a howl of pitch and dry bark. A gray cousin swerved hard to avoid it and slammed face first into the ranch's stone trough. He didn't rise. That narrowed the field. But Elias Gray hadn't moved. He sat his horse at the edge of the pasture, watching like a chess master, one hand on his saddle horn, the other resting lazily near the revolver on his hip. He wasn't fighting. He was waiting, and that's when Mercy saw it. "They're not pushing all the way in," she said, crouching beside the rancher. "They're keeping the heat up to draw us out. They're driving us into the open." "For what?" Then Jonah spoke, his voice thin but sharp. "They brought someone else." Both Mercy and the rancher turned to him. "What do you mean?" she asked. The boy's eyes were bright now, terrified but lucid. "I heard them talking last night before I ran. Elias said if the rancher wouldn't hand me over, they'd use the law to do it." The rancher's breath caught. Briggs already rode off. Jonah shook his head. Not Briggs, someone higher. As if summoned by prophecy, a rider broke from the trees. He didn't move like the others. His coat was tailored, his horse finer, his weapon holstered, but with the kind of polish that said it had been fired in anger more than once. A silver badge gleamed on his chest. "Hell," Mercy muttered. That's Deputy Marshal Arden Voss. The rancher's shoulders tensed. Judge Voss's boy. And Gray's legal hammer. Voss reined up beside Elias, looked toward the smoking wreckage of the smokehouse, and raised a rolled document. "Jonah Gray," he bellowed, "by order of the Territorial Court, you are under arrest for incitement, fraud, and slander against a protected family of standing." "Protected," Mercy spat, "means bought and paid for." The rancher stepped outside, rifle resting against his shoulder. "I don't recognize that order," he called. "Not written by a man who's taken Gray gold." Voss's voice didn't waver. "You're harboring a fugitive and obstructing justice." "That boy is justice," the rancher said. "He's telling the truth, and you're afraid of what'll happen if someone listens." Elias leaned in and whispered something to Voss. The marshal gave a curt nod, then raised a hand. "Final warning, rancher," he said. "You surrender the boy, or we take him by force." The rancher's face went still. Not angry, not afraid, just done. He turned his back and walked into the cabin. Mercy followed, breathing hard. "You gonna give him up?" "No," he said. "I'm gonna show them what they really brought." He crossed to the boy, knelt beside him. "You said you heard things," he said. "Before you ran, you remember names?" Jonah nodded. "I remember everything." The rancher looked him in the eye. "Can you say it clear?" Jonah's jaw clenched. "Yes." Loud. "Yes." The rancher stood. "Then come with me." "Outside?" "Yes," the rancher said, "but not to run, to fight the only way you can." Mercy stared at him. "You're using the truth like a weapon." "It is a weapon." They stepped out together, Mercy, Jonah, and the rancher, and walked into the smoke-filled yard. The gunfire had ceased. Even the Gray clan paused at the sight of the boy walking, pale and barefoot, through the frost. Voss rode forward. "Don't do this." Jonah looked up, face pale, voice shaking. "You paid for a paper to call me a liar." Voss glared. "You're a child, old enough to know what murder looks like, old enough to know when it's your father that did it, old enough to say it." He raised his voice now. "I saw Clay Gray kill Mr. Robbins in Abilene. I saw Elias help cover it up. I saw them forge brands on stolen cattle and hang a drifter to make it look like vengeance." Each word cut through the morning air like thunder. "You call it law," Jonah said, "but it's just a noose with a badge on it." The Grays shifted. One man swore and turned his horse sharply. Even Voss looked shaken now. "Shut him up," Elias growled. But no one moved, because a lie can only carry so far. And the truth, once spoken, can't be chased down. Mercy raised her shotgun. "Anyone tries to quiet him now, they'll need more than a writ." Elias's face contorted with fury. He kicked his horse forward, but didn't get far. A shot rang out from the tree line. Elias screamed, fell from the saddle, bullet through his shoulder. Chaos erupted again, but this time it wasn't the Grays charging. It was the townspeople. From the southern trail came riders, local ranchers, merchants, and farmers who'd heard enough. One of them held a battered deputy's badge in his hand, the other a ledger with names, records, witnesses, proof, and behind them, riding calm and grim, came the real U.S. Marshal. Briggs hadn't gone silent. He'd gone to fetch help. Voss tried to ride, too late. A lasso coiled around his chest, yanked him from his saddle. He hit the dirt hard, a dozen boots descending on him, the grays scattered, their legacy unraveling in broad daylight. Mercy lowered her gun, her face slack with shock. Jonah stood in the frost, chest heaving, fire in his eyes. The rancher put a hand on his shoulder. "You all right?" Jonah nodded slowly. "I think so." "You did good," the rancher said. Jonah looked at the smoke, the blood, the broken lies on the ground, and for the first time in his life, stood without shaking. The smoke still clung to the valley like a veil, but the worst of it had passed. Bodies were being hauled onto wagons, handcuffed men lined the porch, and the chill wind that once carried death now carried something else entirely, reckoning. Marshal Ames stood over Elias Gray, who lay on the ground groaning through clenched teeth. His arm was bound in rough cloth, blood soaking through, but his eyes still burned with something that refused to die. "You'll hang," Ames said flatly. Elias chuckled through blood. "Won't stick. It never does." Marshal Ames didn't smile. "It will this time?" Between this boy's testimony, the cattle ledgers we found in Clay's barn, and the two hired hands who flipped the second they saw federal brass, "You're finished." Elias sneered. "You think justice matters to the kind of men I know?" "I don't give a damn about your kind," Ames said. "We're cleaning house, and I've got a rope that's long enough to reach every doorstep Gray Gold ever touched." Elias said nothing after that. Back on the porch, the rancher watched the wagons roll out, one carrying Voss, hands shackled, the next stacked with confiscated rifles and bags of forged papers from a cabin farther up the trail. Jonah sat wrapped in a blanket, shoulders hunched, a mug of warm broth trembling in his grip. He hadn't spoken since they brought the law down. Too much had been said already. Mercy emerged from the house, her coat flapping gently in the wind. She had changed out of her blood-stained shirt. The sun caught the silver in her hair as she handed the rancher a folded cloth. "Bandage that hand," she said, nodding toward the cut across his palm. He hadn't even noticed it bleeding. He took the cloth. "Thanks." She looked out toward the last of the wagons, then toward Jonah. "He'll never go back," she said softly. "Wouldn't let him if he tried." Mercy studied the boy's profile. "He'll need more than protection now. He'll need something to believe in." The rancher nodded, but said nothing. Then Marshal Ames approached, a folder tucked under his arm. "We'll need your official statement," he said. "Tomorrow," the rancher replied. Ames nodded, then turned toward Jonah. He knelt beside him, his voice quiet. "You're safe now. That's not just talk. Your testimony matters. We'll keep you under protection." Jonah's voice was hoarse. "What happens now?" Ames looked to the rancher, then back at the boy. "That's up to you." That night, after the fires were doused and the last of the lawmen rode off, the ranch house stood quiet. The rancher sat by the hearth, working a dull blade against a piece of cedar, shaving slivers into the fire. Jonah lay asleep, finally breathing evenly. Mercy brought in a fresh pot of water, set it beside the kettle, then hesitated. She looked at the rancher, studied the quiet way he kept his hands busy. "What will you do now?" He didn't look up. "I built this place to disappear," he said. "Spent years hiding in the quiet, pretending the world would just move past me." He finally met her gaze, but the world came back. Mercy nodded. "It has a way of doing that." He set the blade down. "You?" She shrugged. "I buried too many ghosts to pretend I've got somewhere else to be." Then her voice softened. I could stay, just a while, until he's strong. He nodded, and that was enough. Come morning, the rancher stepped outside with Jonah. The frost had melted into dew, and the pasture shimmered under a soft sunrise. Jonah held the rancher's hand, something he hadn't done the day before. Not out of fear, but choice. They stood in silence, watching the light spill across the grass. Then Jonah asked, "Can I stay here?" The rancher didn't answer right away. He looked down at the boy. "You can, but it won't be easy. You'll carry what they did for a long time." Jonah swallowed. "I know. You'll have to be strong, stronger than I ever was." Jonah nodded slowly. "Can you teach me to shoot?" The rancher smiled, just faintly. "I'll teach you to choose." Later that day, Mercy found him hammering boards back into place on the porch rail. The bullet holes were still there, but the posts were upright again. "You told Ames you'd give a statement," she said. "I will. But you're not going into town." "No." "Why not?" He looked up from his work. "Because I've already made my choice." Mercy frowned. "What choice is that?" He set the hammer down. "To stop running." When the wagon came later that week, with more marshals and 2 men from the circuit court, they asked what had happened on the ridge. The rancher gave his account without raising his voice. He didn't embellish, didn't perform, he just told the truth. Jonah sat beside him the entire time. And when the marshals left, it was the boy who held the signed affidavit in his hands, proof of what had been and of what wouldn't be allowed again. Weeks passed. Mercy stayed. Jonah grew stronger. The ranch was quieter now, but not empty. One evening, Mercy stood at the gate, watching the horizon. "You ever think they'll come back?" she asked. The rancher stepped beside her. "Maybe," he said. "Then what?" He looked toward the hills. "Then we do it all again." Mercy smirked. "That's not much of a plan." "No," he said, "but it's enough." Jonah's laughter echoed behind them from the stable, the sound rich and full for the first time. And as the sun dropped behind the ridge, the rancher looked at the place he'd nearly died defending, then at the life being built from its ashes. And he knew there was no going back. Not now, not ever. He had chosen the road without return, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. Justice rides fast, but sometimes mercy rides faster. When the dust finally settled on the valley and the guns were cleaned and stories passed in quieter voices, one truth remained. Some battles aren't won with bullets. They're won with choices, with men who stand up when they have every reason to lie down, with women who see justices not as vengeance, but as restoration, and with boys like Jonah Gray, who rise from the ashes of fear to speak truth, no matter the cost. The rancher had spent years in silence, nursing wounds the world had long forgotten. But in sheltering a child, he'd uncovered something deeper than survival. He'd rediscovered purpose, a reason to fight, a reason to stay, and maybe even a reason to forgive himself. Out here, the law rides slow, but when courage rides with it, even the deepest scars can begin to heal.